calling it the content flywheel, but like this is the type of marketing that I've been doing for roughly 10 years. And so what I think about with the content flywheel is I think about how can you be publishing content across all of the different channels available to you where your audience is, listening, looking at engagement, taking little signals, and then going and continue to do more with that content.
To me, it's way more than repurposing content. A flywheel is something that makes the process easier and smoother and overall more effective. From idea generation, distribution, quality of content, audience growth, each one of those can have its own flywheel.
Today, there isn't like marketing and content marketing. There isn't marketing and social media. Those are the channels. Like marketing gets done through LinkedIn, Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, Reddit. Those are all the places where people are hanging out online. And so your job as a marketer is to understand how to create content on those channels.
How do you get started with it?
Everything works. YouTube works, TikTok works, LinkedIn works, email works, SEO works, ads work, direct mail works, event work, it all works. But it doesn't work unless you pick one or two channels and you have an intentional strategy there. Feedback is the whole name of the game. Like in the 1960s and 70s, people would have to pay hundreds of thousands of dollars, millions of dollars to like advertising agencies and market research studies to get the feedback that you can get instantly now.
One thing I'm doing is I'm asking each guest, who is somebody that you are studying right now that you think is doing a really good job with content? Is because I think it'll make for good clippable moments, but also it's giving me ideas of who to do case studies on, who to bring on to our show.
And I think that's a perfect example of this content flywheel that we're talking about.
I'm Erik Jacobson. I'm the founder of a company called Hatch. We are a video content production service. We create video shows, video shorts, and podcasts for B2B companies. We've worked with probably like 300 B2B companies over the last 4 years, helping them create their content engines. There's DG. What's up, man?
Thank you for having me on your program.
Oh yeah, we were just doing a little bit of context on, what the topic is today. Which is building out a content flywheel. And, I was doing a little bit of an intro of you. I think 95% of the people here, 99% of the people here are already aware of, who you are and, why this is a very relevant topic for you and one that you talk a lot about. But I think we can find some really interesting nuances here that maybe you haven't touched on explicitly before. Which I'm excited about. So yeah, do you want to, do any intro or anything before we get started? You want to just jump right in?
Yeah, let's dive in. I was wanted to know if you wanted me to pitch Hatch. I heard you were doing a Hatch plug and it didn't sound that great. Hatch has helped me with my podcast for the last 2 years. We've done like 150 episodes and it's been such a huge boost for us. In the past, I've tried to find people on Fiverr to do it. I've hired somebody internally. It's like a magic system that has leveled up our podcast production. So like if you host a show at your company, I think it's silly to have your team internally do this when you could be using like somebody like Hatch who has deep experience in doing this. And so we should talk about this as part of like, I think Hatch is actually a big piece of our content flywheel that we should talk about later. But you guys have built something awesome. It's much needed. I also think like in a world of AI generated content, I think you're going to be able to use tools to like make the content better. But I think having a real team of humans that have a strategy, have deep experience in B2B podcasting, I think it's such a valuable service and I'm honored to be a part of it in a small way. And I just am happy to shout you guys out any chance that I get. So thank you for doing it.
Thank you. No, I appreciate it. And yeah, honestly, we've been in the podcast game, content game a long time. So have you. And so I think, today we can talk a lot about the specifics of what we're seeing working and how to build out this flywheel. I think maybe the first place we can start though is, describing what a content flywheel is. And to me, it's way more than repurposing content. Like, I know, that's an easy sort of obvious answer is like, okay, we record a podcast and then like, we'll take some of that and put it on LinkedIn. We'll put some of it in a newsletter, stuff like that. But there's way more in terms of what the goal could be for the flywheel and how it actually benefits your content, from idea generation, distribution, quality of content, audience growth. Each one of those can have its own flywheel associated with it. And so you can create, specific goals for each one of those and create a flywheel for it. So yeah, to me, it's like, a flywheel is something that makes the process easier and smoother and overall more effective. And it all works together to hit those 3 points.
I actually think this is the only way to do marketing today. And I think that when we talk about this, I do think people oftentimes get caught up and they're like, or they people who don't understand it, it gets oversimplified and they're like, so just repurpose this podcast as a blog post. Like, that's it, because they think that process is going to like magically generate lead. They're like, well, I did that and it didn't generate leads. And it's really funny. I was listening to Gary Vee's book, Day Trading Attention. And it's like everything that you and I have been talking about, it's the same thing he's talking about. And it's unbelievable how much of this stuff overlaps. And it's cool when you hear somebody talk about it a different way. But I realize that now this has been the thing that has led me to build Exit 5. This is now given a name for like but now we're calling it something. We're calling it the content flywheel. But like, this is the type of marketing that I've been doing for roughly 10 years. And now there's like a name for it. I came up at I got to be VP of marketing and CMO, and I don't have deep experience in SEO. I'm not an enterprise marketer. I don't know ABM. What I'm really good at is creating content and understanding what an audience wants. And that is exactly what is at the center of the content flywheel. And so what I think about with the content flywheel is I think about how can you be publishing content across all of the different channels available to you where your audience is, listening, looking at engagement, taking little signals, and then going and continue to do more with that content. And so that could mean, and we just did this actually the other day, we took all of the webinars that we've done for the last 12 months at Exit 5 and we analyzed them based on topic and registration. And we looked at we found there's 3 topics that like dramatically outperform all of the others. Like anytime we've done a session around marketing planning, like annual planning and budgeting, we get like 1,200 signups for a webinar versus like some more niche, smaller topics. We might only get 300 or 400. Boom. That's a signal. That's a signal. This is the content flywheel. If this sounds oversimplified to you, then you're not thinking about it the right way. So that's a signal. Okay. So now we know that, okay, this is a popular topic, marketing planning. So what should we go do? Now let's go have actually Peter Mahoney, who gave one of those talks, who delivered one of those webinars. We're doing our very first event in September called Drive. He was the first person that I reached out to ask to speak at the event. Because we know that our audience already likes that topic. We know that he's already educated them about that before. Another topic was ABM. Okay, so now let's go and see who could speak about ABM. Or we look at our podcast about ABM, and we look at our overall podcast analytics, and we see that consistently the most popular topics about on the podcast are about ABM. Okay, so let's use that as a signal to now go and create more content. I think it's this constant evolution. And in the Day Trading Attention book, Gary Vee talks about how like the old way of doing creative for like advertising used to be like you spend all this money, you do all this research, you do this big unveiling, where it should be like you're making hundreds of little doses of content, you're seeing which one gets a reaction, and then you're going to maybe reinvest, and then like that becomes the asset that you use for a paid campaign, or you're going to tweak that piece of content. And I think that this is the most important, like today, there isn't like marketing and content marketing. There isn't marketing and social media. Those are the channels. Like marketing gets done through LinkedIn, Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, Reddit. It's just all of those content. Those are all the places where people are hanging out online. And so your job as a marketer is to understand how to create content on those channels so you can get little signals, so you can repurpose the content, so you can get a content flywheel going for your business, because it makes everything else better and easier. We're learning about future products that we want to go and create for Exit 5 through this audience, but you have to understand how to think about it. And you have to understand that like the goal of doing this show right now, as an example, is not to generate like 2 new leads for Hatch, and you're not going to measure it that way, right?
That was awesome. Number one. And number two, there's a lot we can unpack there, but to echo that very last point, we did a session with Chris Walker just like this 2 weeks ago, and it went really well. But one segment from that in particular, I got a ton of feedback about, which was the structure of your content team. What should that look like as a B2B company? I got a ton of DMs about it. We had a lot of people mention it after the event. And now I know that that's something I should create a lot more content around. And of course, it does benefit us because we help B2B content teams create content at Hatch. And so that's a prime example of just that feedback loop. What I would say though, going from there is, how do you get started with it? So like, you've got a lot of options. You can use, pick a social platform as your starting point and every single day be creating on that. So for example, let's do a post or multiple posts on LinkedIn every single day. And we're going to get the flywheel going with that. LinkedIn's going to be the flywheel, and we'll stem from that. Or one thing that we champion a lot, and I know that you do, is like creating a podcast or a video show or a video series. And like that is the center of it. Or you could, this is getting more popular. I think it'll be way more popular here over the next 2-3 years, is like YouTube channel, like going all in on, YouTube, and that being the center of the flywheel. Your newsletter, like there's many options. Like, how do you think about which one you should prioritize versus like trying to spread yourself too thin? And of course, like, it is actually the opposite of a flywheel to try and do all of those simultaneously without them connected to each other and helping each other and moving smoothly between each other. So yeah, how do you think about like which one at what point you should start with to get this whole thing going?
So I think you got to start, like, I think the answer to this question depends on like, what do you have currently? And if you're starting with zero, if you're starting with pretty much zero, then I think you need to start on a social media platform where there's lots of eyeballs already. And so for me in B2B, I think that would be Twitter. I think that would be LinkedIn. It could be X. And I like those platforms because I think the barrier for entry is the lowest, because when we start talking about content and creative, it's overwhelming. You and I have been trading messages this week about YouTube and stuff. Like the barrier to entry is a little bit higher on those channels because you got to create a video, even if it's just TikTok, and even if it's just like you turning your phone at yourself and starting a video, that is not as natural for people as like writing. And so I love to use like the writing platforms first, where like you can build a massive following and get lots of feedback on LinkedIn and X by just text. And so I would start there, and I would focus in on a core persona and be publishing content for that core persona every single day. Why every single day? Because why not? Why? Like, you're going to be able to accelerate the feedback loop. It's like, you don't just try to, if you want to get in shape, you don't try to eat healthy 1 out of every 7 days. You try to build these small habits every single day. You try to walk 10,000 steps or do something every single day. And so I think if you want to get this feedback loop started, I'm going to pick LinkedIn, and I sell to salespeople. I'm going to start sharing my thoughts about sales and my specific points of view, and could be hot takes. It could be just observations. It could be just notes about your day. And I'm going to start writing on LinkedIn every single day. And if you do that for 2 weeks, I guarantee you, out of the 14 posts that you write over those 14 days, 2 of them are going to get more substantial feedback than any of the others. Now, it's all relative. More substantial feedback could mean 12 of your posts got no comments and 2 of them got 3 comments. Okay, let's now double down. Let's keep building from that, right? Or it could mean maybe you have a bigger audience. Maybe you already have a strong email list, right? I think I'm going to start to look for email replies. And I'm also going to do things like I think you have to manufacture this into your content. I think if you just start blasting out emails and you're like, well, I don't have a feedback loop here. But if you do what we've been doing in our emails for like a decade on every marketing team I've been a part of, there's always a PS in the email. It's always PS. Let me know if you're still reading this email. Also, we're thinking about doing something about X, Y, and Z. Would that be interesting to you? Reply back here. You can manufacture these into your content. Like, even before we decided to do our first event this year, I published on LinkedIn, and I'm fortunate to have built an audience there now. But I said, hey, we're thinking about doing our first event in September. I'm thinking about doing it in Vermont because I don't want to go anywhere. Am I crazy, or would you actually come to that? Hundreds of comments later, I'm like, okay, let's do our event. But if that thing was crickets, then we probably wouldn't have done the event. And so I have an audience now, so you can do that at a bigger scale. But I think you can find really small pockets of doing this. And I bet that if Erik and I took your topic and started a fresh new LinkedIn account, within 2 or 3 weeks, we could get a feedback loop going. And feedback is the whole name of the game. Like in the 1960s and 70s, people would have to pay hundreds of thousands of dollars, millions of dollars to like advertising agencies and market research studies to get the feedback that you can get instantly now. And by the way, you can even get it without even having to write. If you're just curious and you can go find somebody who's writing about that topic and look at the comments on their posts, then you can start to get an idea of the things you should be writing about without ever having to publish a single word, right? Or if you take, I sent you this video last week, but another example is I was on a webinar last week, and on that webinar, I just said something and the chat blew up. It was an analogy that I had never used before. And I didn't practice it. I just like made it up, just being a silly guy, just came out of my mouth on the spot. The chat blew up. I immediately wrote that down in my notebook. Exactly. Alessia was there. My kid's lunch. I made this analogy about somebody asked a question about like, how do you get sales to use more of your content? We create all this content for sales, but they're not using it. And I just went on this rant and I told this story about how my daughter's in first grade and she'd come home and I unpack her lunch and she didn't eat anything in her lunch. And she was like a maniac because she hadn't eaten. And I'm like, why didn't you eat any of your lunch? She's like, Dad, you packed me the worst lunch ever. I don't like to eat any of these things. And I said, okay, well, damn it. Tonight, we're going to make your lunch together. You go pick out the things you want to be in your lunch. I will approve them and make sure that they're okay. So you don't fill your lunch with like, fruit roll-ups and a bunch of nonsense. I can approve it. We did that. We made her lunch together. The next day, she ate her whole lunch. And I was like, oh, and then I use that as an example for like co-create the content with sales together. You got to get them bought in. So I literally on my desk, I wrote a Post-it and I made a Post-it note. Like I have so many notes here on my desk. I have notebooks in every form. And I wrote down the timestamp of that webinar. And immediately after the webinar, I went into the webinar and I clipped out that moment. And I wrote a LinkedIn post for it to save for the next day. And then I went right into Exit 5, our community. And I was going to post it, but I felt like I didn't just want to post the clip. I didn't have enough content with it. And so then I went to ChatGPT and I basically told ChatGPT what I did. And I said, hey, I came up with this analogy about how to make sales use your content. Is there any research that supports this idea of co-creation and creating things together? And this is where ChatGPT can be amazing. And boom, I got back like a link to a Gartner study that said like 74% of sales content, some nonsense like that. I got something that said like, yeah, this is actually called the IKEA principle, which is like if people can get bought in and create the thing together, they're going to be more committed, they're going to be happier, they're going to do a better job. And I was like, perfect. So I took that research, I took my clip, and then I wrote it into this 500 word post for the Exit 5 community in maybe 5 minutes. That post blew up. Then I took it for LinkedIn, right? And that's just one little tiny play from a 2-minute thing that I said on a webinar. And so I think people like to oversimplify this and think about content, like just redistribute content. I see it as more of like your brain has just got to kind of always be turned on to find these little sound bites and then like know how to use them and get them into play. Now I wrote a post about it in our Exit 5 community, and I intentionally SEO'd the title. And so I wrote how to get sales to use the content that you create, because in our search, we notice people are always searching for that sales enablement, how to get sales to use your content. That's now going to show up there forever. And I think that's a perfect example of this content flywheel that we're talking about.
That's a killer example. And it's one thing that makes everything else easier, but you have to have the rails for it basically. So you already had the distribution, playbook that you would want to do with something like that, because you'd been doing it for a long time. So you knew, okay, I'll take the insight, I'll take the feedback, and then I'm going to go here and do this, go here and do this, go here and do this. Part of that is reps, and part of that is just getting started. And an example for us too is one thing I'm doing right now with our show. So we just launched a podcast last week. Good idea for a podcast company and video show company to have our own video show. And one thing I'm doing is towards the end of every episode, I'm asking each guest, who is somebody that you are studying right now that you think's doing a really good job with content? That could be a B2B company, it could be an individual. One of the main reasons I'm asking that is because I think it'll make for good clippable moments that can involve third and fourth parties to that piece of content, that we can tag and engage and things like that. But also it's giving me ideas of who to do case studies on or who to bring on to our show that I didn't have to source myself. So like one piece of content can now turn into, 3 or 4, net new episodes for us. And that flywheel will just literally keep happening every single episode. So that's a perfect example. Any other, like practically on your day to day, like something I'm curious about is what does this look like for you on a day to day basis? And I think we can take it from that standpoint, but also there's a lot of people who are looking to do this where they're the content person at their company and they're trying to help power their thought leaders or execs at the company and create this flywheel for them on behalf of the company. So I think you're kind of sitting probably in two of those roles right now, like combined. I know you've added new team members on the team who are helping you with content, but you're the thought leader, but you're also, doing this yourself. Like, what does the structure look like to you that powers this easily for the thought leader, but also, from the position of, the content team member?
I think, first of all, I think it starts with like, I think if we rewind back, you have to think about why you're doing this. And I think for me, the why is like not some direct sales goal. It's like literally you're the chef at a restaurant and you want to know what people are interested in so you can not waste the food that you make, so you can make things people actually want. I think it comes back to that. And so for me, like in my role with Exit 5, we're serving B2B marketers. It's super important for me to be able to understand what things people are interested in, because I've seen so many content teams over the years, like everybody's content team is always busy. They're always doing stuff. They're always writing 15 blog posts, 3 emails, 2 like I actually don't think everybody should do a podcast, right? Like, because most people are just doing a podcast to do a podcast because somebody said do a podcast. We're like, the reason we do it is because I know the ROI of it. I know how it builds relationships. I know that it actually doesn't matter if it didn't help us sell anything because it's a Trojan horse to create all this other content. There's so many ways to justify it. And so I think ultimately what drew me to marketing and content and this being my lane is like, I like being like the tastemaker. I love getting invited to like talk on something like this and like having an idea and literally like taking a screenshot of somebody's comment in Slack and like sending that to the team and saying like, this is a good example. And so I think now as a person with a team, like I think it's my job to like let the team run and, create stuff, but it's my job to like help kind of guide them in direction and have my finger on the pulse of what people want. And I think that is true for anybody, whether you're a small business owner or a SaaS founder or a CMO. You have to have your finger on the pulse of what people want. And then it's your job as a marketer to deliver that to them. And so I also think a big part of it is just constantly being curious, like constantly reading, listening, watching, studying the things that people are interested in, like at the macro level, like what consumers are interested in. And then at the micro level, like as it relates to your niche and your industry, and being able to be the glue that marries those two things together. Now that's like the high level strategy. More tactically, I think what that means is we are in Slack. We have we're kind of always in there. We have different Slack channels for different topics. So for an example, we have a newsletter Slack channel. When we send out our weekly newsletter, if the response to that newsletter, because we're all on the email, it's everybody on the marketing team is on the email alias. So everybody sees the replies to that email. We're taking a screenshot and posting it in the newsletter Slack channel and being like, damn, today's newsletter went bonkers. Like so many responses about this topic. Then someone's gonna be like, yeah, this is great. We should do something else with this. Okay, cool. Let's look at the upcoming guests for our podcast. Like, oh, actually, we don't have anybody that's going to cover this in the next couple of weeks. Let's go find somebody. Even if that was the only outcome, great. Like we just got something there. Or we're just kind of always thinking about, like, I think that we have a year-long marketing strategy, but it's always changing. And so like if we keep writing about a topic, like let's say we keep writing about AI and use cases for B2B marketing, and that topic is really popping off, like we're thinking about how can we do more with that. So it's like, oh wow, we keep talking about AI in our newsletter and the response is crazy. We should do something for this. Like, and then we need to give our team space in like our regular editorial meeting and weekly team meeting to talk about this and say like, yeah, what topics like should we be, are we not delivering on for our audience? Yeah, AI is really popular right now. Well, I just saw SaaStr, who's kind of a similar company to ours in this industry, and I just sent this around last week. They're doing a 2-day like event just about AI. That's really smart. I wonder if we should do something like that. I don't want to do an in-person event. You know what we should do? Let's do a virtual event. Let's do a 2-day virtual event and see if we can get 5,000 people signed up for the Exit 5, B2B Marketing AI Summit. Cool. Good idea. Then months later, we go and execute on that. We get 5,000 people signed up. We get 2 or 3 sponsors. It's a huge success. If you rewind all the way back, that started from the response to that newsletter, right? And so that's how I think about building on all of these channels. Or I might do a podcast with somebody and I'm like, holy cow, this woman is amazing. Like, let's have her back or let's have her speak on an event. It's truly about marrying this like curiosity and learning and connecting that to the business. And I think I'm passionate about this topic because this is the non-quant skill in marketing. Like marketing has become so scientific and so data driven, and it's great, but we forget that there's a skill here. And being a tastemaker in your niche is a skill. It's like you have that one friend in college who you always wanted to like have the aux cord or like, Dave, can you make me a CD, right? It's no different. That's what great marketing is. And I think, you can be, there's like different sides of the coin in marketing. You can be a great marketer because you're so operational and so analytical and so data driven. You have Chris on, like you and Chris are close, right? Like even us, like I see us are different in that standpoint. He's much more like, data driven. Like we analyze this pipeline, this conversion rate. That's not who I am. I'm more like, look at this stuff. Here's an idea. Pitch the idea to the team. This is exciting. Go and create it. And so I want to just say this to like give space to like, this is part of the job. This is part of the skill set to be a tastemaker, to be a creative. And this is what it takes, I think, to be successful in content. And like, I don't want people to think that like the content flywheel is we are doing the content flywheel like that. This is just marketing to me. It's not like I have a 5-part framework. Like I could write that if I wanted to write a book about it, we could put it into a framework, but I think this is just doing marketing to me.
Yeah, that's a lot about what I'm taking from, your process and ideas on this is like, it's not super rigid. This is a very fluid process. My question though would be, who should own it? Like, let's imagine, a B2B company that's got, between 1 and 5 content team members and then 1 and 3 thought leaders at the company. Getting the feedback loop and being the tastemaker, does that have to be the thought leader, or can that actually be the content team powering the thought leader, for them to show up and record and like, hey, these are all the insights we've sourced from the community, from feedback, what have you. Here's what the audience wants to know. And then helping them create that content? Or do you think like for this to really, really work, like the thought leader has to be as engaged in the process of like creating the recipe, like you are and have been?
I think it's tough to fake it. I think the thought leader, air quotes, has to be involved. But I think that involvement is gonna change a little bit. And so I'll give you an example. We're kind of doing this in 2 ways now. And so like now that we have a team at Exit 5, like I am doing I'm still doing a lot of the stuff that I mentioned earlier. But another example is like sometimes we do this like inside Exit 5 segment of our podcast where Matt, who's on our team, I said, hey, we want to create more like content where it's no guests, it's just kind of you and me just riffing. Basically, Matt pulls, like we kind of do it every couple of weeks. And so he looks at popular podcast episodes, popular newsletters, and then like discussions in the community. And he kind of extrapolates all that and he prepares a little doc. And I don't prep at all. And we show up on the podcast and he just interviews me and we have a back and forth conversation about the topics in the community. I think that's a perfect play to do that. I did this at Drift when I was working there with David Cancel, who's the founder and CEO. He was like, I want to start this podcast. I already have the name. I want to call it Seeking Wisdom. I want to talk about like lessons and learnings and building and entrepreneurship. I'm like, great. And he's like, can you help me start it? And I was like, sure. And so I kind of helped him prep, and then I sent him off into a room, and he was just I didn't want to be a part of it because I was nobody. He was very famous. I didn't want to be in the podcast. I was like, I'm just going to help enable you to do it. He goes in a room by himself and it doesn't work. It just turns out like he didn't, at that time he wasn't good doing it solo by himself. So I was like, okay, let's try to do this again. So I'm going to come in the room now and I'm going to interview you, but then we're going to cut out like my side and it's just going to be that. That didn't work either. What it morphed into is actually both of us on the podcast, but both playing different roles where I'm interviewing him to tease that content out of him. And so that's how we got it. And so I think you can do it that way. The thought leader, though, by definition, needs to be involved, needs to be engaged, because how can you be, if you're not tasting the food, if you're not innovating, you're going to lose your edge, right? You have to stay sharp. You have to keep your finger on the pulse. I think as you build a team, though, like, it doesn't mean you're going to be in the weeds all the time, but you're still going to be on talking to customer calls, talking to investors, talking to advisors, reading, industry reports and emails. You're at events. Your brain just needs to always be switched on to those things. And so it might mean you go to some like CEO only event, you get a bunch of ideas and you go back and share them with your team, and your team is going to help you go and execute on that. I think that part of that can evolve. And I think you do see this, like, I watched like what Devin Reed did when he was at Clary with their CEO. He basically like coached and guided the CEO to start creating content on LinkedIn. But that CEO was like a deep industry expert and subject matter expert. And so they got to work together and meet halfway. And it's like, that's the role of the marketer can be to enable that in the thought leader inside of the company.
Everybody is different when it comes to this. Like, some people are going to be able to pick it up quickly. Like if they're going from the thought leader and they're in the thought leader position, they're now bought into the strategy. They've got small or multiple people on their content team that's going to help power this. But they're still going to take iterations, exactly like you just described. Like with David, he bought into it. It sounded like it was his idea to like, hey, let's go do this. But it took several iterations for you all to develop the system that worked. And what we've seen is like sometimes this takes 6 months of like testing and figuring out the cadence and the rhythm and the feedback loop and optimizing the content in a way as a team. Like this is obviously a team effort. It's really difficult to do this if you are the thought leader and you're trying to, be the content architect behind the scenes. It's obviously possible, and a lot of companies are in a position where they have to do that. But I think like taking a little bit of the pressure off for this to be perfect from day one. Like right now for us, we launched our show, and I know it's going to take me 3 months to find the absolute perfect sweet spot of our cadence, topics, and rhythm for everything. And a lot of that is going to be getting feedback from the audience along the way. Like I already did, literally episode 1, I now have a massive insight on what our audience wants to know more about and more content I can create with that. So let's kind of maybe do like one more, and then anybody who has any questions, for DG, for myself, for both of us about anything content related, content flywheel, anything we've been talking about, feel free to drop it in the chat. So you mentioned like in the beginning, like the starting point potentially, and this obviously doesn't have to apply to everybody, but potentially like picking one social platform and the starting point being writing. Like it's the quickest way to get the information out there, start getting feedback, whether it be LinkedIn, Twitter/X, what have you. Let's say that this flywheel is now up and running and it's systematized, it's optimized. How are you thinking about the distribution then, like across platforms in general? Like what are you seeing right now, from LinkedIn, newsletter, YouTube, Twitter, what have you, that you think is working right now for the distribution rails of all of this stuff. Like anything you're seeing working right now or like interesting to you.
Let's talk about each one of those channels in a second, and I can tell you about what we're doing and what's working or not. But then also, I think before we talk about that, I think to me, the key to distribution is first deciding on where you want to play. There is a narrative of like, just content distribution, just distribute your content. That doesn't work. Every B2B SaaS company I know for years now has just been putting YouTube videos up on YouTube because you're supposed to just distribute your content. And every one of those videos has like 41 views, right? Whereas like, what are you doing now? You want to build, it starts with a goal, and it starts with a hypothesis and a goal. You want to build on YouTube. Are you just going to take this recording and throw it up on YouTube and expect that that's going to work? No, you're going to edit this. You're going to tweak it. You're going to record an intro. It needs to be like YouTube first. And so I think before you think about distribution, you need to think about where are you going to play, and then also realize like you probably can't play anywhere. And if you have no distribution, so now, we have for Exit 5, we have LinkedIn, I have 165,000 followers on LinkedIn, but we're actually doing something now where all 5 of our team members are posting. And so we see that as one channel, like add all of our followers together, right? And so we have, let's say 250,000 combined followers on LinkedIn. We have 20,000 people on our email list. We have 3,600 members in our community. We have 20,000 listeners a month for our podcast. Like, we already have distribution there. And so we're trying to grow those channels, right? But if we didn't have that, I would just pick one main channel and start to build and start to focus there versus like try to do 5. And so if you're like, form a hypothesis and say, we really want to build an email list, then just do that and get really good at building the email list and grow that. And then once you have 5, 10, 20, 30,000 email subscribers on that newsletter list, then the chances of you being successful on another platform are going to be much higher anyway. Or maybe don't build an email list, just focus on LinkedIn, start building there. Once you get traction on LinkedIn, then add in your email list, right? Or just go do YouTube, build a YouTube first show, then add those other things. I think that is the most important thing. I think we've seen time and time again that everything works, dude. Everything works. YouTube works, TikTok works, LinkedIn works, email works, SEO works, ads work, direct mail works, events work. It all works, but it doesn't work unless you pick 1 or 2 channels and you have an intentional strategy there. And I just have found over and over again, if I'm successful on one channel, that also dramatically increases the likelihood that I can be successful on another. And so if I wanted to go after like TikTok right now, it might not work, but I at least know I have 100 ideas of videos that we could make because we've been doing this in all these other channels, right?
Yeah, this is such a good point to reference as like the starting point for all of this, because this kind of goes back to this repurposing idea. Like the simple fact of repurposing your content on each platform, it's good, but like if that's your goal, then the goal is probably incorrect. The goal is to be successful on each platform, and your point is the best way to do that is to pick one and play that game correctly on that platform. And each platform is differently. Your point is very true, which is I'm treating our podcast audio feed on Spotify and Apple and the execution required for that as completely different than our podcast content that I'm using for YouTube. Completely. Like literally the title of the episodes is different. How I'm introing the episodes is different. The cuts we're making are different. The descriptions are different. Everything is different because the platforms require a different execution. But I've got the source material there for that, and we will learn and get better with it over time. And the content I'm using for that for LinkedIn is also different because LinkedIn requires a different execution. So the idea of like just taking one source material content and then just repurposing it without the intentionality of each platform and what it requires is probably really not going to, achieve the end result.
I could take something, I could write something on LinkedIn that explodes, and I literally go and post the same thing on Twitter and nothing happens. And yes. I still do it. That's just because I'm just like, whatever. I kind of just tweet I kind of treat Twitter as like my blog, and I just like want to have stuff over there. And so if people go over there, but like if I've been stuck at the same follower account on freaking Twitter forever because I don't have a real strategy there. I just post, and it's perfect example of it's different. Literally, I'm taking the same thing, same exact thing that I'm writing on one channel that has gotten me to 165,000 followers. I'm posting it on the other channel and nothing's happening. A perfect example of like I don't have a strategy over there, but I also don't care to have a strategy over there. Like I'm good. I don't need that. I have the cash cow channel, and I'm focusing my efforts on there. I just post over there because I still get DMs from some people sometimes, and it's, it is what it is. But
Okay,
dude, this is so important though. I think this is advice seems so simple that like people are gonna be like, yeah. No, this is the only way. This is you cannot stop picking 6 channels or 3 channels or 2 and doing like an okay job on each. Like the only way is to do what you're doing. Like you and I have talked about this a lot. It's like focus on YouTube or Kip and Kieran, they're doing marketing against the grain, right? They are so intentional about building this show for YouTube.
Yes.
And if you go to their YouTube channel, go to Marketing Against the Grain YouTube channel, they're not just taking the podcast and posting on YouTube. They're editing it differently. And they are doing things like OpenAI yesterday just announced a bunch of new updates. They are like demoing them all on their podcast because that's what's going to get people to watch it. And they're doing that because YouTube is an incredible discovery platform. They could build a massive podcast on Spotify, but they don't want to. They intentionally want to build on YouTube because they understand the opportunity there. So they're building for YouTube first, only YouTube. You have to do it that way. Focus on one channel, please. If you just take I went on a rant earlier this week about this, but like, man, it is the simple, timeless things. Like I used to have this imposter syndrome in my career where I'm like, I don't know everything. I'm not up on all the trends, but then like I've been in this industry now for 15 years and you just kind of see, which is not that long, but there's people with much more experience, but it's enough to have seen a couple cycles. And I'm like, oh no, I'm good. I know the fundamentals. I know the timeless principles now. Like there can be new channels. It's going to come back to the same things. And the law of focus with like one channel is more true than ever.
Well, and it comes back to the goal. So for Kip and Kieran with Marketing Against the Grain, their goal is to win on YouTube. Their goal may not be to have a #1 podcast in the Apple podcast charts.
No, it's not.
Exactly.
I can't tell you what it is. I'm friendly with Kip, and we hung out 2 weeks ago and we played golf. But I picked his brain so hard on their YouTube strategy, and I can tell you that the goal is not to have the #1 podcast. They have an intentional goal for YouTube, and that is what they're building around. And so that could be you saying like, I want to start a TikTok account and I want to get 1,000 followers. Great. Do that. And you have to play this content game knowing like you're playing for the long term. Like they're also doing this and they're not measuring it by like how many HubSpot subscriptions do they sell by doing this podcast, because they know how the game is played. They know it's not about that. And so part of you listening to this now is going to have to be educating. Maybe it's your boss, maybe it's the CEO, maybe it's your company. You need to educate them on why these types of things are long-term investments. And now also, I know many of you that will watch this and listen to this in the future, this is not your only part of your job. And so you have to do, maybe you're on the content team or you're head of content or doing something in marketing. This is a part of your job to create the show, to create the content. Most of the time you're still doing other stuff. And so I think you have to have the lens of like 70%, like look at you guys at Hatch, right? This actually is important for Hatch, but it's not the whole business. And so you're spending 70% of your time on like things that are going to drive and build pipeline for Hatch today, but you're doing this channel now in the 20 or 30% of your time so you can start to build this. And I think when you separate it out and when you say 70-30, you're not putting so much pressure on that 30. You're not then measuring that 30 as to be like, well, yeah, this is a long-term bet. So of course we're not measuring this on how many Hatch, demos did we get because Dave came on our live show. You're looking at this like, no, this is an investment. We're putting some credits in this investment that we're making for later. And I think that's a really important piece of this too.
Yeah, you can't measure it on one piece of content. It's the collection of the strategy over time.
Yeah.
And that takes time to compound. We've got
I want to give you one more example. Sorry.
Yeah, no, this is great.
So on LinkedIn, there's a guy right now called Adam Robinson, and he's done a good job on LinkedIn. And I only know him because he's been a huge advocate of my book, and he's like 6'8" in person. So you be careful who you mess with on LinkedIn. But he has basically gone from like 0 on LinkedIn to 85,000 followers in the last year or so. And I think he's a perfect example of what we're talking about, where he has just focused on LinkedIn. He tried a bunch of things before. He did like a documentary series on YouTube. It did okay. But when he went hard on LinkedIn and was like, this is what I'm doing, he built an audience there. And you learned the content. He didn't go in there thinking about the content flywheel, but he started publishing on LinkedIn and then learned, oh yeah, I now know. So the reason he continues to be successful on LinkedIn is because the more he publishes there, the more he learns, the more he knows what to create. 2 weeks ago, he DM'd me and he's like, hey, I'm thinking about making my next play now. And I'm like, perfect. Now you have 85, you've established an audience on one platform. You have the feedback loop going. He wants to go and do YouTube now. He's like, what do you think about that? I'm like, great. It's not guaranteed that it's going to work, but I think like now you add on second channel, and I think that's the perfect way to do that. I just wanted to put that in there.
Yeah, I love that. And one last thing I'll mention about him specifically is like, and I've seen him write about this, is he's putting in the time. Like none of this works unless you actually put in the time. Like if you want to devote 1% of your time to LinkedIn and try to get the flywheel working on LinkedIn, it's not going to work. Like he's literally spending, and he actually admitted like this is probably too much, but like more than 50% of his time is creating content. And he's in a position at his company to be able to do that. He's got a team around him and stuff like that. But like
it's not too much. He's gotten an incredible, like how much, if you had to pick a number of like advertising dollars that this would have, like millions. It's insane. It's insane. Yeah. And so I hate when people say that, like, but it takes time. No kidding. Oh, you want to win customers and you want to like create an advantage in your industry and you want to just create this like magical platform that like you write about things. Like I posted about a webinar the other day and my LinkedIn post drove 250 signups to that webinar. Like no shit. It's taken 10 years. It's taken 10 years of writing on LinkedIn to be able to get that response. Now it's created an incredible advantage. I hate when we're like, yeah, but it takes time. Like, oh my! I'm gonna
what's the exactly? What's the alternative?
Like we want this to be an advantage. Like okay, then you know what? Don't do this. Go spend $2 million on AdWords or something else. Then it's great. Go ahead and do that.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. This is awesome. We've got about 8 minutes left. I want to get to a couple questions. Okay, we've got a few. I'm going to start with Danielle's. She asked a good question about if you're the content person tasked with pulling out insights from the thought leader. So I'll kind of read out the question here. Like you're tasked with pulling out content from the thought leader. Do you think you have to be someone who is similar as the audience you're creating content for? No. So for example, if you're creating content for operations people, do you need to be someone with an operations background, or like you can be a marketer, content marketer, what have you, and sort of representing that audience and trying to understand what their needs are and facilitating that with the thought leader?
No, because that's what the thought leader is for. That the thought leader is that, like if ops is your ICP, the thought leader maybe isn't an ops person, but they started a company in the ops niche and it has deep experience in that industry, and that's who you're talking to. I think that person who's getting that content out of them, it could be the marketer, it could be an ops person with that experience. Like you just don't know. It's like a chemistry, it's like a co-host chemistry type of thing. Like who's going to work well with, and I don't even mean on camera, but who's going to work well with that thought leader. I've seen it be like an intern. I've seen it be somebody on the sales team that like does it as a side job and they work on that. I don't think the person, the audience doesn't care like, oh, that this is Erik and he actually doesn't work in ops at all. As long as you're good at getting content out of the thought leader, it does not matter. I do think, yeah, if there's somebody in that niche that is more privy to that type of knowledge and information, it could be a better fit, but I don't think it matters. No.
Yeah. And honestly, like if they did have that background, like they could probably represent the face of the brand, like the content brand themselves.
Here's a great example of that, by the way. Like Ryan Holiday on Instagram, sometimes he'll have him and his wife will be in like a long car ride, and he'll have his wife just like handle like Q&A on Instagram. Yeah. And nobody cares that she's not a stoicism expert. It's like, no, she's getting the content out of him and he's answering. And I think that's how they get it. What's up?
Hi, Alicia. Well, Dave answered my first one about who he follows, so that was cool. I was following the top 3. So
wait, can we actually talk about that though? Because I think it is worth it. I think there are definitely people that I follow, but lately I've been letting my, the LinkedIn feed does serve you up things that are based on your engagement. And so I think what I've been doing lately, and I think you can do this to curate your own feed, it's less about the people and more about like, if I see something interesting, I'm going to comment on that. I'm going to like the post. I'm going to comment on that. Even if it's somebody that I don't know, even if it's somebody that like doesn't like me or I didn't like them, or it doesn't matter. I'm going topic first and I'm going to comment on that because then I know my feed is going to get better. And also I found that that's an amazing signal for like comments often so often turn into like me back to this content flywheel. LinkedIn is an amazing writing platform because I might go to LinkedIn, I might see Erik write something about podcasts. I comment on his post that is basically a prompt that gets me to write. That comment gets a bunch of engagement. I'm like, oh, cool. This is a great next LinkedIn post for me, newsletter for me, etc.
So thanks for answering that one. My other question is, where do newsletters fit into the content wheel?
So I think we see LinkedIn as like the top of the funnel. And then again, this answer is going to come back to a strategy for us, for our business. And so for our business, we're a media company. Exit 5 is a media company. We have a community and we have content, and we generate revenue through 2 ways. We have memberships, so people buy subscriptions to our community, and we have sponsorships. And so having an email list is a big part of our business because the more people that are on our email list, the more people that eventually become members of our community. The more people that are on our email list, the more we can charge dollars to sponsors, the more people buy the sponsors' products, et cetera. So it's strategically valuable for us to grow our email list. And so we use LinkedIn as the top of the funnel. And then ideally, we want to drive everybody to our newsletter list. And so we might take a LinkedIn post that gets a big reaction, and we might take that and then turn it into a newsletter. We see it as like a second step down. And so it's like tip of the iceberg feedback from like a social media post might then turn into a signal for like what we're going to write in the newsletter that week. But the newsletter has a particular format. And so it's like every week there's kind of a takeaway and observation that might be driven by a signal from our community or a signal from LinkedIn. But we also in the newsletter promote like a webinar that we're doing, a podcast that we're doing. And so I think that the way that I see it is the newsletter would not be possible. We could not do nearly as good of a job on the newsletter without the feedback loop from social media. So it's like the next step in the flywheel.
One thing I'll say about that too is like the newsletter and podcasts, at least from our standpoint, is like a good relationship channel. And then the other channels are like the discovery channels. And what I mean by that is like with podcasts, like the audio podcast feed, and with newsletter, there's no algorithm in between the communication between you and the audience. So that helps you and that hurts you. It helps you in the sense that like they can't throttle that down. Obviously, like Gmail can throttle it with, filters and whatnot, but it also hurts you because it also cannot throttle up your engagement or net new audience members. Like, so I look at it too from like both of those, like where are discovery channels that people who don't currently follow us can log on to YouTube and our video is on the recommended for you page right there. And then where are our relationship channels that we can sort of own, and I actually don't love that term. It's more like, earn, because they still have to want to open the email and consume it. Still has to be good content. But yeah, I think those two play really nicely, together from that standpoint as well. We've got 1 minute left. And Alicia, thank you so much for jumping on there. That was awesome.
I got more minutes if you want to finish.
I do too. I can go a little bit over if anybody wants to hang.
No,
Erik, you had a great question about X and Twitter. If you want to jump on here and ask that. And I think we can expand that question a little bit too, if you want, in your game, to just talking about X in general. Like there's a lot going on with that platform right now. And but yeah, feel free to jump in and ask your question about it.
Yeah, thanks guys for your time. And like you said, there's a lot going on that platform. The last year has been a little bit tumultuous, but Dave, you had mentioned that it's a great place to start for getting a foothold on some of this content stuff. But do you feel like you need to take advantage of the paid verification process in order to really reach an audience on X, or can you just start from zero, build your audience, and kind of work through building out that content? Like, does that content get delivered without that verification in the way that you
Yeah, no, it does. It does.
Okay.
But I think if you have a couple, I think it's like 150, $160 or something like that.
Yeah.
I see it as like it's a little part of the game where like if you're okay with spending $200 of your money and getting the badge, it's like a fake award. It's like a fake status symbol that like does look more legit, even though people. So, do you have to play that game? No. Is it like buying a $200 pass to like look more legit, and maybe that will help? It just depends on like, do you have enough financial capital to be able to like throw that $200 and not care about it? Then I would do it. If you're at a point where like, man, I've $200 is like, a piece of my rent, I don't want to do that, then I don't think you have to play that game at all.
Okay, thank you.
But if you have some disposable income, like I would go and do that.
Anything else you're noticing on X in general, Dave? Like maybe I don't know if this is the best one to end on, but yeah, just in general, I know you're still playing over there, and like
I'm playing, but I'm playing like I actually feel like I know what it would take to do something over there, but I don't want it because I don't know, man. It's just way more nasty than LinkedIn. Like people, I would have to. I think you got to post more. Like the people that I see winning over there are like people who are like, the key to success is waking up at 5. Like it's just nonsense. I'm not knocking anybody who does that, but it's like one or two lines, platitude. Like it's just not. Those things are not. I've played that game and I've gotten roasted for it. It's just not authentic to who I am. And then like you could just post a picture of you doing anything and someone's like, oh, look at this privileged asshole drinking a water bottle. Like it's just, I don't want to play the game. And so I have no interest in doing that. And I think if it was I would go anonymous account or do it from a brand account. I don't want to play that game. I don't want to bring that toxicness into my mental health. And so LinkedIn is plenty for me. No, thank you.
I also, and this isn't 100% true, but like, I think that X is probably a little bit better of a platform if you are selling to founders than if you are selling to other roles in an organization who are not the founder or the CEO. Like at least from what I see on X and Twitter is like it is heavily used by founders, whereas LinkedIn is more used by like every other role at the company. So yeah, again, that's not 100% true, like, but I think that there is directionally that's probably accurate. This has been amazing, man. Thank you for this. Anything like, last thing on your mind with all of this in general, like that you think, people could run with and take, and implement, whether that's just like some motivation for people, or like a tactical thing, but like, what do you think is a good last little tidbit to leave people with?
Yeah, I'm gonna go back to basics and back to fundamentals. And I think that so all of the stuff that we talked about is great, but it doesn't matter unless you have a strong point of view and a clear ICP, aka ideal customer, aka dream customer that you want to go after and build an audience around. Otherwise, you're just creating stuff. Like you have to start with that persona in mind or that goal in mind. Maybe it's not maybe like it doesn't always have to be a persona based, but maybe you are a startup founder that wants to build a brand for yourself, because if you build a little bit of a brand online, you have a hypothesis that it will be easier to attract employees, to get investment, to get speaking opportunities in your niche. Great. Then that's going to dictate like what you write about. Or maybe you want to use one of these online channels as a way to get customers, and your customers are, 25 to 40-year-old sales professionals working in B2B. then you're going to go and do these things. So I think you got to go back to like, who are you writing for? Who am I creating this for? Go back to the best writing advice you could ever have, which is like write for one person and just start. And then you got to get started. I think I even messaged you last week. I'm like, man, I need to do some on YouTube, but like, I just don't know where to get started. And even I'm saying this still, but I think that's why I push to go to the text-based platforms, because I think for whether it's newsletter, LinkedIn, or X, like you could just start writing today and, just fire up your notes a couple weeks about that topic, put it in there, and then every day try to have something to say on those platforms. And you gotta get going. Like you can't go run the marathon unless you start running the first mile, second mile. You got to build up.
Love that. Well, thank you again. Everybody here, I'm sure you're already following Dave on LinkedIn.
Not on X. Follow me on LinkedIn, not X.
But YouTube soon. I'm going to plant that seed here now for everybody, and really appreciate everybody joining. Dave and I are going to do these more. So we'll try to have a cadence to these, and obviously we'll publish the info for that on social when we get the next one lined up. But yeah, really appreciate this. I'm going to email this out to everybody. We'll put this up on YouTube and everything like that, if there's anything you want to reference again. But yeah, really appreciate it. Dave, thanks again, man. And we'll catch everybody at the next one.